Well, why don't we go around and introduce ourselves?
Joey.
Hi. I'm
Perfect timing.
Well, I'm Carl Dean.
Okay, I'm Elise McMillan. I co-chair the Mayor's Advisory Council.
Tom Droffel, Holiday Inn, and parent.
Joey Step. Juan Cardona, parent and volunteer.
Debbie McAdams, Metro Nashville Public Schools.
I'm Mark Hayes with Metro Nashville Public Schools.
I'm Judith Presley with Tennessee State University.
I'm Sally Barton-Arwood with Belmont University.
Michelle Wyatt, Susan Gray School.
I'm Kate Deitcher, Transition Facilitator from Metro Schools.
I'm Erin Nicholson. I'm a parent and an advocate.
Maggie Massamore, I'm on the board at the ARC of Davidson County, and in full disclosure, I guess I should probably say I also used to be Special Ed Director for Metro back pre-2003, let's say that.
And I'm Linda DePriest with Metro, and Maggie was my boss.
Oh, very good. And you're?
I work for you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here, and thanks for all your hard work. As you know, and I've told you many times, we've been together, that the origin of this group really came from when I was running for mayor, and the group of citizens I came across who were the most, I think, discouraged or with the way things were going in the city were the parents of children with special needs. And so I had a desire to look into that issue and to try to do something about it, and had some friends who pushed me and continue to push. And we had our first meeting of this group. You issued 4 reports recommending many changes that students with disabilities, the way they're educated here, and I guess the emphasis has been on inclusion. That has been one of the major recommendations that there has been progress on. And you made a series of other recommendations that we continue to work on. I'm very thankful for your work. I know that the pay is not what you'd want it to be, but I thank the co-chairs, Elise and Linda, for their hard work, and I know, Elise, you've chaired this since the very beginning. So I am happy to hear today's report, and we can have a conversation about it.
Thank you. And we are going to do presentations from the podium. So move here. And we want to rearrange the comfort. Can you come on the way here? Well, thank you so much, Mayor Dean, and what a hard-working group, and you will hear that throughout this report today. You know, you said the pay is nothing, but I think everybody in this room would argue the pay really is to see more Metro students included in going to their community schools and see more job opportunities for the young people. So that's the pay, and if we can double that, we'll all celebrate. Thank you. We really appreciate the work and support this year. We started off with Wendy Tucker as a co-chair, but we have really appreciated working with her this year in her new role. She does work you hard. We know that. She works us hard, but we really appreciate that. And we also appreciate working this year with Ashley Daughtry and her work in helping us really develop the jobs within Metro government. We'll have a little bit more of that later in the report. We're going to have our presentations today presented by a couple of the co-chairs who chaired the work groups. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Linda DePriest to make a few remarks. Thanks.
Along with my co-chair, Elise McMillan, we want to recognize all of the council members whose efforts have really resulted in the development of this year's report. These countless members have spent many hours. These council members have spent many hours addressing the focus areas. And as you can imagine, our various backgrounds and perspectives contributed to many spirited conversations. But at the end of the day, there was collective strength in our beliefs, because our goal is to improve the education of students with disabilities. So, Mayor Dean, once again, we express our appreciation and our gratitude to you, because you have made the education of students with disabilities a central focus of your administration, and we applaud you for that. We know that you have never lost sight of the issues, the importance, and the value of these students and their families. So thank you, Mayor Dean. And now I want to turn this over to Erin, who leads one of the work groups.
Good afternoon. Do I need to speak into this? Do I need to be concerned about talking into the microphone? Okay. Put my glasses on. Thank you, Mayor Dean, for your continued support of these issues that I know you know mean so much to me as a parent and as an advocate and to so many of us in this room. I've had the great pleasure of serving on the Mayor's Advisory Council for 5 years, since the very first time that we convened, and I'm pleased with the work that we've done over the last 5 years. I have the privilege of sharing the first 4 of our 8 recommendations with you today, and the first 4 really focus on the inclusion initiatives that the district has undertaken the last 5 years or so. As you know, the district has been working on this really since 2008, when we made that sort of our primary focus the first time that this group came together. 5 years later, we stand here today, and I can say as a parent and as an advocate and as a member of this group, and I think we're all in agreement that progress has been made. Some very good progress has been made. I think most notably, I would like to point out that as of this school year, all kindergarten through 2nd grade students and 5th and 6th grade students are now being educated in either their school of zone or their school of choice, rather than being bused off to a cluster site. So that is a huge improvement, and I believe that part of the strategic plan is to continue that up through the other grade levels, which is wonderful. And I would also like to say that the will to move towards inclusion certainly has been evidenced by leadership in the Exceptional Education Department. However, through the work that we've done this year, we do have continuing concerns about that conversion process, and we feel that many students' needs are still not being met. So the recommendations, the first 4 recommendations that I'm presenting today, are intended hopefully to get at improving where we are vis-a-vis inclusion so that we can help move those students forward. So this is our first recommendation. I'd like to give a little bit of background, if I can, on this, starting with going back to, I think it was 2008 when Mike Remus came to town, and over at Westminster Presbyterian, he spoke. Mike Remus was the director of special ed in Williamson County for about 10 years, and he guided Williamson County through its inclusion process and has done that in other places. And he came to town and spoke to a group of 200 parents and educators, and he really emphasized during that talk how important it is to have a roadmap when you're doing this. It's so very difficult to take a district from one that provides services to students in a segregated setting to one that provides services in an inclusive setting, and you have to have that well thought out, well-developed strategic plan to do that. In both 2008 and 2010, part of our recommendations in our report related to the development of a strategic plan. And so part of what we did this year was we looked back at our prior recommendations and wanted to assess progress and look at where we were. So one of the things that we did was we looked at the current strategic plan for the district, and unfortunately concluded that although there is a strategic plan, that plan is insufficient to efficiently guide the district. And we feel that both retroactively as well as proactively, that it's been insufficient to sort of to get us up to this point, and that it needs to be revamped and reworked to move us forward. So this is the first recommendation for the Exceptional Education Department to develop a comprehensive, effective strategic plan to guide the district's continued development and implementation of inclusive services. Critically, we feel this needs to be done by July 1st of this year. That's the recommendation. We also feel that it's vital for the Board of Education to adopt that plan. There needs to be buy-in at a high level of leadership, and we feel strongly that if that buy-in isn't there, the plan will not be as effective as it needs to be. The last component of this first recommendation is that the plan should be reviewed annually by a group such as the MAC or another group possibly modeled after the Chamber of Commerce Annual Report Card Committee. And that group would look every year and see how the district is doing. So that's our first recommendation. We can move on to our second recommendation. Again, just a little bit of background on this. The underlying, I think everybody in this room probably knows this, but I felt like it was important to give a little bit of background. The underlying philosophy of Metro's conversion plan is to eliminate the old system of providing services to students based on their categorical placement, a life skills classroom, a resource classroom, and rather to serve those students primarily in the general education classroom. That's the model. That's what the district has been working towards. There's a recognition, however, that some students will continue to need to receive instruction in a smaller setting. So to that end, the district has developed what it's calling Academic Centers for Enhancement, or ACE classrooms. And these rooms are not intended to be a place where students spend their entire day, or even the majority of their day. Really, it's a pull-out, a place where students can be pulled out of the general education classroom and have some services delivered to them in perhaps a quieter setting, that sort of thing. This significant change in the way that services are provided has also truly impacted the role of the exceptional educator, of the special ed teacher. Under the old model, a special education teacher had his or her own classroom. They had a defined set of students. They worked with those students, many of them for most of the day, and that was their job. Under this new system, these students that spend a portion of their day in the ACE classroom are also spending a great deal of their time in the general education classroom, and many of them need support and service in that setting. And it is the role of the exceptional educator to work with the general education educator to meet those needs. And so jumping to this recommendation, which states that MNPS should take steps to ensure that building principals understand the role of the exceptional education teacher in ensuring that the student's IEP is implemented across the day and in all settings, including the general education setting. Our group had a lot of conversation around the fact that we perceive, I think, some of the MNPS employees, parents, advocates perceive that there has been a great deal of confusion amongst both principals and teachers as to the role of the teacher and sort of where that starts and where that stops. And so one of our second recommendation is that we would like Metro to really work on clarifying that at both the principal level and the teacher level to help them understand that your role doesn't stop within the confines of this one classroom. You have to be working to meet the needs of students throughout the building and throughout the school day. Okay, recommendation number 3. This one is pretty straightforward. MNPS's superintendent of schools should mandate that both exceptional education and general education teachers attend trainings on inclusive education and inclusive practices. This is a recommendation that we have had before in prior reports. Possibly each prior report has included something along these lines. Continuing training, ongoing training is vital. This is sort of related to the prior recommendation, but more focused on the training piece and the professional development piece. Again, I'll kind of give my parent perspective, which is that I think that lots of general education teachers feel that they lack the skill set to do this, and really they don't, because any good teacher can teach any child. I truly believe that. But the training piece and kind of that hand-holding and the mentoring is a vital piece of making sure that this conversion process goes like we would all like to see it go. We can go on to recommendation number 4. How am I doing on my time? Am I okay? Okay. The 4th recommendation focuses on issues of consistency and accountability. We believe that in order for the conversion process to be available to all students on a consistent basis, the exceptional ed department must be given authority to establish a district-wide mandatory framework related to inclusive practices. All administrators and staff would be required to follow this framework, and there would be accountability for those who do not. Without this measure, there's really no way to ensure that all students with disabilities are benefiting from the new system of service delivery. And that recommendation really grew out of discussions that we had related to concerns around the inconsistency that we've all seen across the district. There are certain schools that are doing a fantastic job with making this happen for students, and there are certain schools that just aren't. And due to the way, I guess, that the district is structured, we felt like the Exceptional Education Department needed a little more power in being able to dictate to schools and to principals and teachers what this should look like. So that's a recommendation. It would be wonderful if that could happen. I don't know if it can, but we shall see. Finally, we can go on to the next slide. This is not an actual recommendation. We did, however, want to take the opportunity today to comment on our collective concerns related to the recently announced reorganization in central office of Metro Schools. Although the reorganization was announced after our official work had been concluded, we felt it was important for us to talk about this because we believe this reorganization is very likely to have a negative impact on students with disabilities. As you know, Mayor Dean, under the reorganization, students receiving exceptional education services no longer have direct representation through the direct reporting to Dr. Register. As part of the reorganization, the Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Support, Dr. DePriest, who has authority for exceptional education and who previously reported directly to Dr. Register, now reports to Mr. Steele, the Chief Academic Officer. We consider this to be a significant step backwards for students with disabilities, and I'm sorry that Dr. Register isn't here today, but I wanted to make this request in person, but we would urge him to reconsider that and to place that position back on his chief executive staff. I believe that concludes my portion.
So happy to be here today to have this opportunity. When I made my disclosure earlier, one piece I didn't add is that transition and employment of people with disabilities is a real passion for me. So limiting myself to the key elements is a real challenge. If we look back historically, transition seems like a relatively new thing for people who are just coming into exceptional education and IDEA, but really it goes way back to some of the early years of IDEA. In 1983 was the first real requirement that related to what happens after school for students with disabilities when pre-vocational and vocational assessments were added as a requirement for students with disabilities. Then in 1990, transition as a service was initially added to the IEP as a requirement. At that time, Metro Schools started the first community-based transition classrooms. And I'm happy to say, very proud to say that I was a part of that. So going back and looking at the history and what's going on in the programs right now has been a real learning experience. And what we found was that we got off to a great start, and then we kind of went to sleep with it over the years. And it's only been in the last few years that there's been a real resurgence in Metro Schools with looking at the transition program again and really beginning to update it and bring into the current years, kind of catching up with all of the things that happen with NCLB and greater accountability and indicator 13 that requires looking at students even after they exit the school district to look at how successful they are in their adult life. So now is a really good time to be looking at the transition program. Metro has some really good things going on, and in the past few years has done an even better job at focusing on some of the areas of need, expanding some things like working better with parents and families who are going into those transition classrooms. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So when we look at number 5, our recommendation is that the school district should set clear outcomes for students with transition needs for those disability areas, and really focusing on clear expectations for college and/or career readiness, as well as customized, focused on the independent living goals for all these students. And basically what we're saying is that we've never really had our end picture in mind of what we wanted to accomplish. So really setting those very clear expectations for the transition program and beginning with those in mind is what we want to do. And when we talk about starting with the beginning, we mean not just beginning with the end in mind. We mean beginning at the very beginning with our very youngest students. Transition is not a box to be checked off at the age of 14 and every year thereafter. Transition begins with our students when they're in preschool and they're beginning to learn things like how to work with one another, how to play together in a group, and all of those things that lead to adult behaviors that help people be successful at work. So really looking at those outcomes for all students and across those ages is an important piece of that. We looked at some pieces under here we think are important to include in those outcomes. Meaningful parent participation is very important because no matter how good a job the school district does working with students and preparing them for the adult life, if their families aren't prepared to help support where those students are and help them move forward as adults after the age of 22, then they're not going anywhere. So that meaningful participation is important, and we're pleased that this year, in coordination with some of the agencies that have been gathered here, there's going to be a transition fair that's bigger than we've done before. It's more of a summit and involves more opportunities for real learning for families. So that's an exciting piece there. We also feel that one of the outcomes that all students should exit with a resume, a strong resume, and a portfolio, and technology should be used to help support that, because our students are not always able to go into a job interview or an interview for college and be able to express fully how well they can do. So those are important things to look at. Looking at all of the areas of outcome, including independent living in our transition program. Frequently, the focus has been just on work. We really need to look at all of those areas of life that help people be successful as adults. Because if you can't be successful in your personal life and in your community, it greatly impacts your work life too. Another thing that's very important here is the involvement in inclusive practices and having access to all of the general education. As we look at our transition and community-based classrooms, we want to make sure that we have a full continuum of services for all students, taking care to include those who have not necessarily been included by all of the transition offerings in the past. And that would include many of our students with what we might refer to as high incidence disabilities. Those students who are spending most of their time in general education, they are expected to have a regular diploma. They may graduate, they may go to college, but they're still lacking some real skills. And the feedback we get from people in the community, when their children graduate and go off, they're not being successful. And frequently it's those students who have learning disabilities as opposed to the ones who have more significant challenges. So we want to make sure that is expanded, and also that many of the logistical concerns are addressed, things like having flexible transportation so that students can more easily get to and from work sites. Also, that we move away from the group training that's done with many of our students, where you go in a group and everybody does the same thing, but moving to a model that is more focused as the child progresses through the years in school. so that you might start out with exploration in a variety of jobs, but by the time you're ready to exit, you have been spending some real focused time on the job area of your passion and your choosing, not what is the site available to go to. So more individualization there. The academies in the high schools offer a great opportunity, and the school district is encouraged to really build on that and make sure that students with disabilities are included fully in the academies, including not being scheduled as an afterthought wherever students fit in whatever academy there happens to be room, but that the students are meaningfully included based on what their interests, their strengths, their abilities are. Successful adults work toward their strengths, not toward their deficits, and we're not doing enough of that in our transition program, so we want to encourage that. There's a big issue that Tom will bring up later that has to do with the requirement of liability insurance for students with, for businesses that house those classrooms. So we think that needs to be addressed. Also, some issues related to transportation. There's a state law against use of vans to move kids around in schools, and yet we feel that's the best way and what districts in other states do to help get transition students to work sites. Number 7 really gets into the curriculum, looking at the skills and knowledge required for that successful transition. There again, looking at all of the areas. Also looking at all of those ages. Self-determination is a big part of that, and working with self-determination, which is a combination of skills, knowledge, and beliefs that enable a person to act with goal-directedness, self-regulation, and to have autonomous behavior. And we need to start working with that. It's embedded in the curriculum already. Teachers need to be helped to be made aware of how they fit into that. There's lots of other information included in the report, but basically these are the areas we feel need to be addressed that have to do with the specific programming. But there's some other things that this community needs, and Tom's going to talk about that.
Well, I have one point, there are a lot of moving parts. So my part is this is, as a business person, the handoff needs to be better. We put all the resources against getting everybody ready, but at 22, as a parent, all of a sudden you're looking at a kid that you have to do something with because Metro's given everything they've got so far. So as a business community, we have to figure out what to do from 22 on, and I think there's some opportunities for us. As we started this process, we looked at Knoxville. Knoxville had a great blueprint and a lot of success of putting people with disabilities into some great jobs. They had, as we went up, we had a chance, there's 5 of us that went up there. We had a chance to study, spend a whole day with them. And they gave us a little bit of a blueprint of what we needed to do. Probably the core of that is they had a consortia made up of the city, the education, the companies, the organizations that all have the same mission, and it was a very strong core and they're well put together. And they've been together for a long time. They also had a gentleman that Dr. Nicholas, Bob Nicholas, who was a commissioner from New Jersey, who had the resources and ideas of how to put this together into real use to get jobs. So our study from there was it can be done. They had great success in doing it. They had a great success in putting people together and into jobs in distribution centers, Walgreens and Lowe's and places like this. And when you look at the model, Nashville's got a lot of distribution centers with a lot of opportunity. So we saw that as a great model and great opportunity to learn. We came back and we had already started building a consortia, loose consortia. What we found in Nashville, there's a lot of people with the same mission, but doing it in different ways at different times. And a bunch of us, Elise, Maggie, all of us started building our own consortia that was meant to be getting people jobs with disabilities. with the same mission. So as we came back, we realized we need to broaden that consortium and really use that as our long-term basis to sustain this mission that we have. And so we saw the core of that, and your involvement or representative from the Mayor's Office involvement would help support that direction. Another thing that Maggie alluded to, so the consortium is going to build us long-term. They were together, I think, 10 years or something like this. So we looked at it and said, man, they really work well together. If we could do the same thing, we could make progress. So we call it Nashville Works for a better term, and we think that could be the basis for the long term. The next thing is we looked at it, and I had a personal experience with Deborah McAdams and ourselves at our hotel. We wanted to be a base for a transition program. And we spent 2 years trying to do that. The biggest obstacle is I got the owner to approve, I got our management company to approve, and we had a $10 million liability policy, but it had to be unlimited liability. So we could never get the attorneys to agree to that component, and we would sort of solicit your support on making that a little bit more flexible so that we could create more sites. I couldn't get my owner to say, well, you can have unlimited liability if something goes wrong. Not that you would ever expect that, but that opportunity really, I think, exists for more companies. As more companies get a chance to get exposed to people with disabilities, they see the passion and the opportunity to really give them jobs. So I think that would be a great opportunity.
So the problem comes from on the Metro side, where
Yes, sir.
we're asking basically for identification, is it for something?
Yeah, I believe it's Metro government requires an unlimited liability policy as opposed to what Tom's Hotel had, which was
$10 million.
$10 million. So.
And we went back and forth for 2 years saying, you know, that $10 million is pretty good. We're not sure what you're going to do to create this $10 million issue, but in the end, we couldn't solve it. It was my company's attorneys, and we spent a lot of time doing it, and Metro's attorneys. So I would ask that if there is a way to soften that up, because that's just going to be an obstacle for allowing us to get to these places where they're going to create opportunities. So that's a request. The next one is if you look at it, we're going to have all these folks coming and students coming out of schools, and we think we can create opportunities, and I'm going to get into that next. But we need someone to, to connect the dots. We need a developer or someone that can take the opportunities, because it's very complex. It's very diverse in terms of the people with disabilities, and matching those to jobs requires someone to coordinate all that. We think we can create jobs, but we need someone that can understand the skill sets, the differences, and be able to match those together. So we're requesting 2 years. We could go long before we requested money. So we're requesting money for a position that could even be set with a third party or someplace where we could leverage that position to start the first 2 years in getting people in jobs. Ultimately, I think after 2 years we could be self-sustainable, but we need to get it started to cross-reference that, not only with Metro School graduates, but with people in the community as they exist now. The last is, with all that, we need to, we've already started working on a presentation. I'm in the hospitality community, and clearly we have some really good folks that are doing some good things. But we think we could broaden that out significantly. And we did is put a factual presentation together, Maggie and Art and a group of us. And we are currently working on a video that we can embed components of success stories with employers and employees that would acknowledge the successes that are there. So a factual presentation showing successes, long-term tenure of long-term employees, because I personally have one, and you can see their passion. And I think people don't know that, so we have to carry that message out, and we carry that message out in a presentation. With that, we hope to include that as a DVD so that we can carry it out, send it to people, carve it up into components. So if we talk to SHRM or a civic organization, we can tailor it to where we want to send it. This, we think, with some of the other things we're suggesting, would give us real chances to get in front of people that would take some chances and really give these people jobs. It takes a little bit more, because when you you started, the matching components, the skills, the interests are sometimes difficult. But I'll give you an example. We had a young man, Kevin, he's been with us a year and a half with a development delay. Came in, started out with, had struggles with doing our cafeteria, working 20 hours a week. Within 3 months, he was promoting, starting to do prep work, starting to do dishes. Now he's a full-time employee, giving speeches to other special needs groups. Pretty impressive young man, a year and a half in the job, and you can just see that as we can grow those success stories one at a time, it's just going to build those opportunities for other people. So I think we really have a real opportunity if we go through this, and we see that we can make a difference, but we're going to need a little help a little bit here and there. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tom. Just to finish up, Ashley has put together a more detailed review of the work that she has done within Metro government this year. You remember we did last year's presentation at the Metro Library, and that still is a work site within Metro government. I know that Ashley has worked with Kate Dixer, Mark Hayes, and others to build those sites. And I know that the Sportsplex is a site. More of this is detailed in the report, but we really appreciate that work on both sides. It's not always easy to go in and develop these sites, but the projection is for this next year from Ashley's report to increase the number of departments participating, the number of sites or opportunities within existing departments, and also the variety of tasks available for students. So we are looking forward to seeing that increased availability. So we appreciate her time and your commitment in that effort. And with that concludes our report today, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you all for your hard work. It's very, very impressive. Would there be a consensus on what any particular area that should be the priority, the next big first step?
If I take the liberty to speak for our subgroup, I'm guessing that we would say that the immediate development of the strategic plan, to have an excellent comprehensive plan in place by July 1st before next school year starts. Again, that roadmap is essential. And does anyone have any other feelings about that?
From the perspective of the other committee, in my opinion, we would concur with that because that roadmap is important. And then the next piece of that would be to do the transition outcomes. I think that also is part of it's your destination for the roadmap.
And actually, it's part of that roadmap.
Yeah,
So,
Part of the strategic plan.
yes, it very much
Transition would be a part of that.
Yeah.
That plan, that overall picture.
But the plan just gives you how you're going to get to your outcomes, and so you have to start with those. What's the bottom line we want to accomplish, and have that big picture in mind. So I think those two things become the most important to start with.
So number 5 would be like 1A.
It's hard to
Then if you get a number 3 and number 8. Only because you have an opportunity to create opportunities for kids after 22. If we don't do something now and start moving along, we really are going to have people leaving the system and no place to go.
Well, and I think whatever we do that improves things for students is going to have an impact on improving things in Metro itself, and both Metro government, but also our city, by providing greater opportunities. And the consortium is a big part of that. I don't see those as going on as separate entities. To me, the school district, even though it's charged by the law to be responsible for transition, a school district cannot do transition alone. And we think about transition agencies as being simply the ones who are going to come in like folk rehab and provide a service to a student. But the agencies and the community involvement is much greater than that. It's how does this community, how do the disability organizations support
what the school district needs to do to make roadways into our business community to provide the jobs.
Yeah, and along that lines, one of the attachments to the report, we actually included the bylaws for the Knoxville group to say that. So we have some key players there. So I think that would be helpful.
And I would just perhaps add one thing on the strategic plan. In the longer recommendation that's on page 2 of the report, something that we strongly suggested was that MNPS consider using an outside independent facilitator to help develop and guide that process. Now, I know that, hiring someone to do that can be a cumbersome, lengthy process since I've been involved in that before, so I would not want that to slow the process down. But I feel like, and I think our committee agreed, that it would be important to have that outside facilitator come in and just give that objective kind of guidance and leadership for the process.
And so, to do the strategic plan, that would be generated by the schools, the MNPS. The district would do that. And then your thought is and the people involved in doing that would be Linda and your...
And leadership and learning. We've actually had the preliminary meetings to talk about developing a strategic plan.
Well, let me just say, so I can make sure we're all on the same page, because the recommendation stated that the team charged with developing the plan would include families and other stakeholders. So let's make sure that we're all...
So you include families and stakeholders, the schools, and then your idea is to have an independent facilitator.
Exactly. When Linda mentioned that we had some preliminary meetings, it wasn't specifically about this. But as in becoming a part of leadership and learning, we kind of tried to work with the Exceptional Ed Family Advisory Council on those issues and sharing that information. But it was just the preliminary meetings that we had, the overall strategic plan with for the district and all the groups that were in leadership and learning.
The strategic plan that we're talking about, though, is a very specific strategic plan related to helping the district continue the conversion process. Absolutely. Right, and fix some of the things that have maybe not gone as well as we would have liked. Absolutely. Up to this point for inclusion. Yeah.
And would number 2 that'd be part of the plan? I would think the principals would be.
Yes.
And 3
would really be part of the plan as well. Yeah. Right, and training. And 4 really would be as well.
That's recommendations flow out of that.
And then the whole separate area then, of course, not necessarily separate, because this would be part of the plan too. The transition would have to be.
Right. Absolutely.
In the way you envision that beginning is that while in school, you actually begin the transition process, and that's where the academies work, where you're focusing on.
But also the real focus, not waiting until you're 14 and you're entering that high school age, but really starting to help preschool and kindergarten teachers understand how beginning with the end in mind with all students.
Building skills earlier.
And we don't start teaching Algebra 1. We don't wait when we're teaching Algebra 1 to then introduce number concepts. We build toward Algebra 1. Same thing with transition. There's a lot of early skills and concepts that teachers and general ed and exceptional ed teachers need to be more aware of. And that information is already in the general curriculum, but people aren't focusing on it and using it in ways that develop skills.
Okay. And so the transition, as I'm reading it, the transition program, numbers 5 through 7, really would be something that could be part of the strategic plan. And something that, all right. And then number 8 is the big challenge, which is you do the transition plan, you help prepare students for post-education, and then but to get there, you need to have jobs.
We need to build a way to catch the kids coming out of school so that, we build 22 years of education, and then we say, okay, it's not that, But it's almost like that, where you know, okay, now you're on your own. But as a community, we really have to catch them, you know, and try to hold on to those that we can to try to create opportunities, even if it's 10 hours a week or something that keeps them engaged in the community, the parents engaged in the community, because you know, we're creating hope, but we're also creating opportunities. And these kids really want to. They want to be wanted and want to be involved. And right now, it's really hard to keep them engaged, and that's why we're trying to build these job opportunities in some fashion. And we can grow that significantly by, you know, the example that Nashville did. It's really not, you know, with a little resources, and I say little, but support and resources, we could really make a difference, I believe.
And you're thinking 80,000.
80,000, correct.
Next to a $10 million insurance policy.
So, really, you know, possibly your support in the presentation of some fashion, the 80,000 so that we can get this kick-started where we have a facilitator that can grow and match these jobs, and really possibly a representative on this consortium so that we do have connection to you know, the direction and feedback. Those three things would be the connecting pieces for us to jumpstart those opportunities.
And actually, they could be done through a grant through the government or whatever to an agency in the community. Just as an example, the ARC is more than willing to work toward that direction. But right now, the ARC has no money to start anything like that. But we see it as it's not an agency or a school district or a government thing. It's an entire community effort.
It's got to be ongoing. Once you're out of school, there isn't someone to watch those, but this person would work with Special Olympic and find those people that want jobs and try to match those skills and all the different components that are out there. Plus with Metro Schools, as people come out, you know, you're already engaged and you're already looking at those opportunities. But they just, you know, you might not have an immediate opportunity at 22, but you may at 23 or 24. And those people, you know, they can be put to work.
And just an example, and I have not forgotten this, when we did make a trip to Knoxville, so there's this group that's been meeting together for 10 years. Schools, some of the provider agencies for adults, a representative of the mayor's office, and there was a new large employer coming to town, and there was information on jobs. Everybody in that group got information. Here are these jobs. So the schools, just like the other provider agencies, got that information. So they could be looking at some of those jobs where students still served through age 22. If they had the opportunity to have a paid job. So how wonderful. You don't fall off that cliff at 22 and then try to recover when you aren't employed.
And that, to me, I think that's one of the saddest things is when our kids graduate and they go home.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. And I hear that so much from parents.
And you can solve some, you can't solve all of them.
The other
no
thing
doubt,
that
but you can
happens-
sure make a difference.
The other thing that I see happening in the community is when kids maybe leave the schools, have something, they have a job, they are connected, but for one reason or another, they can't keep that job. And then when they lose their job, there's not a good way of support for that person with a disability to be able to re-enter the job market.
Exactly, Maggie, excuse me, and what Tom was saying, and a component of that would be to have some sort of pool of job coaches that once they exit the school system at 22 and enter the, you know, employment world, that there would be available some sort of job coach, coaches being able to sort of maybe rotate throughout these positions or whatever, because the employer doesn't always necessarily take on that responsibility, and they have left the school system. We no longer legally at 22 have any responsibility, and therefore that's what Maggie was saying, that they oftentimes then lose the position because they have no additional supports on the job site.
Sure. And in the past, Voc Rehab has been able to provide that support back in the early days.
It's so time limited now.
For many students, but that is long gone. The point that I wanted to make, I think to me that's so important about what each of the recommendations have made, and what Tom and Margaret, I'm sorry. I can't say Maggie. What what they have shared is that it's really, it is truly moving toward that inclusive support where where people from the community, from the school district, families all have a part in that education, and it's the acceptance of difference and diversity, and being able to plug in somewhere in the community, depending upon what your skills are. All of these things really focus toward our goal, the goal that we have as a leadership team in exceptional education, and that is inclusive services for kids with disabilities, for kids and young adults with disabilities, and we appreciate that support.
We have 240 partners and academies. And all the academy component, and you see those partners, and you look at it and go, as you're recognized for volunteerism as the city mayor, we have the people there. We just got to connect.
One of the things that hasn't been articulated today, but needs to be said, is that expanding the transition services to be more inclusive of students who have the high incidence disabilities, those that are in much greater numbers but haven't been as specifically served by transition facilitators or the program because they've been so focused on their academics, is that we need more transition facilitators at the high school level to assist those students, because two transition facilitators who are currently in the district now cannot possibly provide services to that many. So it may not necessarily take more staff, but a reorganization of staff at the high school level. And a lot of people really get upset by the idea of doing something more work-related as opposed to focused on academics, but all of these things are really part of the school's report card. And the research shows that students who have a goal, who are self-directed, who have something they're working toward, have better school outcomes. So if you're really looking at improving your school report card, improving transition services and supports for students with disabilities is definitely going to increase your school report card grades, if you will.
Yeah. Okay, well, and then the direct report issue, that was a recommendation in the first go-around? Was it, or did that recommendation ever come out of the group?
It was in the 2009 report that the leadership of schools take more ownership over. Right.
That'd be a cabinet position, I think, is the way.
And then we praised the decision to make her a direct report and national report.
And prior to 2009, it was not.
You were not invited to the table, I can tell you that. You were specifically excluded from the table, from my experience. And I was there 11 years. That's the way.
We don't want to go back to sleep.
No, thank you. No. No, I've been pinching things away for a long time now, so.
I got it. All right. Well, very good. I think they're both. I mean, if you look at the transition and the plan, that's two good, solid recommendations for us to work on.
Great. And they're not mutually exclusive.
No, they're related. They're connected in some way. And I'll look at the funding issue. And ARC would be in a position to do. Funding is the issue for you to
Funding is the issue, and we did find the money, for example, to engage someone, a filmmaker, to do the video. We've been able to come up with money to do a lot of things, promoting. We're working with several businesses in the community right now, other than Tom's, a trucking company and some other people who are already working to replacing people and getting people out there, but we don't have the funds to do it. looking and would certainly welcome a Metro grant or whatever.
Maggie, you alluded to the transition institute.
Yes.
It's going to be March 9th at Antioch High School.
Got your email, I just need to check.
Thank you, yes.
I got it an hour ago.
I just got through
Wendy's
that.
been apprised.
I'm been pretty busy with that. But Metro and STEP Support Training for Exceptional Parents, which I work for that agency, we've been working very closely trying to get this situated. That'll be March 9th at Antioch High School. We cover a wide variety of topics ranging from employment to conservatorship to accessing insurance. It's basically just to give parents and students and educators and community members a snapshot of what is available. The idea is not to give them all the information necessarily. The idea is to give them the contact point and then give them a snippet of information. We've also had the opportunity to do a program with the community-based students. Myself, and our director, Karen Harrison, came and did what's called a Dream Bowl Builder activity, which basically the idea is to give the students a voice and let them say what they want to do in life, and that was very successful. So I do want to commend Metro for allowing us to do that. And again, I wanted to put that on y'all's radar for March 9th. Usually begin around 8 o'clock in the morning with breakfast and registration, and then the program starts at 8:30 and it goes until about 3.
And it's free.
Yes, absolutely free.
Well, let me, I'll review this and we'll follow up. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.